And Val.
Good morning, Reese. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Still getting adjusted. A nice long trip out to Alpine, Texas, and getting back into the studio and getting the week underway. How about yourself?
Yeah, I saw we were kind of scrambling here, getting everything hooked up. Yeah, taking some of the equipment with you. I want to hear more about what you did in Texas this weekend. Sounded like a good time.
Yeah, Texas. It's about a 6 hour drive away from 6, 7 hours, depending on which way you go. And I like to go the scenic route. So I drove down through Lincoln County. Right now, the death of John Tunstall took place February 18th, 1878. Drove through the Billy the Kid, things over there in Lincoln County on my way out. Went through the Permian Basin there in eastern New Mexico. And an amazing, the whole region is covered in pumps and tanks and work trucks, and it's amazing to see that many men at work. Kind of made me think about building the pyramids of Egypt and how many men it took, to do that. And again, it was at the Lone Star Poetry Gathering. Now it's more than poetry; it's a music gathering. Our own Doug Figs from Lematar, New Mexico, was performing down there with some of the artists that he really admires. He got to perform on stage with them. Folks like Brent Hill, Darren Little, Rod Taylor. I got to meet Alan Chapman and his wife Katie. Jim Jones was from Albuquerque, was there. New Mexico itself had seven artists performing from New Mexico down there in Texas. It's a great little community. It's about less than 6,000 people in that community. Sits about 4,500 feet elevation. They, like New Mexico, like Socorro, have a university there, Sul Ross University. It was the university that hosted a lot of the classes and events that took place with the Lone Star Poetry Gathering. And so it was kind of really neat to see that community with 6,000 in Sul Ross University and how they were doing and what they did for tourism, being located near the Big Bend, about 100 miles away from Big Bend Park. And just a good time to get out there, see some Western country music. There's a real revitalization, if you will, coming from it. There are a lot of people, it was their first time, like myself, at this Lone Star Poetry Gathering. So I went down to Alpine to cover Doug and to meet some Western country artists. We've got a show coming up March 5th with Almeda Bradshaw, who was down there, and Doug Figs at Jackson Ranch Steakhouse, and hoping to bring more Western music performers into Socorro. We've got Ramblin' Rangers, who was down there, coming through tomorrow, and hopefully have them on an interview. So just kind of expanding, our coverage of our Western heritage. Like I said, with John Tunstall's death and the Billy the Kid, the Lincoln County War, it's probably one of the most famous Wild West events and historical events that happened right here in New Mexico. And, kind of the Western music celebrates, honors, remembers, recalls. It both recalls the history and their tradition, as well as the current struggles of the modern cowboy and cowgirl and the actual, ongoing ranch life with new roots Western music. So I hope that's not a mouthful, but it certainly is.
Yeah, it is. You mentioned John Tunstall a couple of times.
Tunstall, yeah.
Tunstall. Who was John Tunstall?
John Tunstall was a gentleman that came over from London. His father was a successful merchant in Canada. And he decided to come down to New Mexico because the land in New Mexico was affordable. And he ran across McSweeney, who worked for Dolan and Murphy, two guys who had federal beef contracts out here. Murphy had gotten out of the Union Army. And John Tunstall at 23, 22 came down to New Mexico and bought a ranch near Rio Fria, I think it is, if I remember the name correctly, and was here to compete with what was known as the House at the time. And he was working with Chisholm and Sweeney to bring in cows and compete with beef. And so he opened up his own general store. And so he was competing with them, and it was known as the House, and it was part of what was called the Santa Fe Ring, a loose association of political and business interests. But he rode out to meet what he thought was law enforcement officers and was shot in cold blood. And it was his death, and it was his how he was murdered, that William Bonney, who later became Billy the Kid, witnessed. And that's where William Bonney decided to do the revenge killing on the officers, the sheriff that came out and shot him. And that began the Lincoln County War. So John Tunstall, you might hear all through New Mexico about Billy the Kid, but John Tunstall is actually the character that was murdered that kind of started the whole thing. His family actually came out in 2010 to visit his gravesite. And there, so that's who John Tunstall is in some of our Wild West history here in New Mexico.
So then the Lone Star Poetry event, how long has that been going on?
Oh man, I think it was 33 years. It was 33 times in 2018. So we got 34, 35, 36, I think 37 years it's been going on out there. So for a very long time, it's been taking place there in Alpine, Texas. And it's a really nice historical region. Fort Davis is just a little bit away. And again, working cowboys, and cowboys is the mascot of the Sul Ross University. But yeah, about at least 36 years it's been going on. This is the 36th annual. It almost went away in 2019. But they're coming back. They're looking at their numbers, and they're working on getting some grants to keep it going. And it's a really neat thing. Pulls people in all across the nation, and some really great leading talent of poets and musicians.
So that sounds a little bit like old timers in Magdalena, a little bit, kind of that kind of thing, with a little bit of a more focus on poetry and music, songwriting.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Old Timers. There's not as much like Old Timers has a lot of the historical theme visits. You can see people in Mountain Man and Cowboys, outfits, historical Buffalo Soldiers they've had there before, some of those things. And this is definitely focused on poetry and music. It was, some of it took place in the Big Ben Museum on Sul Ross University campus. So there's some history exhibits there. But it definitely would be something that would fit in with Old Timers and actually have the music. Like, for instance, Earl Gleason's song Maggie, and some of the songs about, Magdalena used to be one of the largest stockyards, west of the Mississippi, here in New Mexico, back when the San Augustine Plain was some of the largest cattle ranching operations in America at that time. So it would fit in real well with that.
So while you were gone, we had some news here in New Mexico. The governor lifted the state mandate for mask wearing, and it's still kind of, a process. I know some of the facilities haven't totally lifted the mandate, like the hospital, doctor's offices, which makes sense.
Right.
I think the school board is meeting today to vote on it. I think there was some premature announcements made last week about no mask wearing in school, but the school board actually has to vote on it, I guess, today. So there's an emergency meeting at the school board. If anybody has any input, you can go down to central office. I think it's at 5:30 today, and go see what the school board has to say about the mask wearing. Any comments on that, Reese?
Well, I think the one thing I noticed was the Navajo Nation decided that they're going to continue the mask wearing for a little while longer. They're being a little bit more cautious at pulling that back. There's some talk in the nation about those Democratic blue states that have pulled back the mask mandate earlier. It's really nice to go and see the optional mask, on the stores. I know when I was traveling, and a lot of the workers are still wearing their mask, because they have to deal with the public. And that makes a lot of sense. But it's good to see that the transmittivity rate, the rate of transmission, is dropping down below 15%. It's good to see that the news reporting right now that the hospitalizations are in decline as well. So those are all good indicators that that the transmission is going down, the severity of it is going down, and that it is definitely time to consider this. And I think everybody taking their own approach for what they feel about it is a good thing. And I like the word optional. I think that's a nice thing to see. If you're still feeling uncomfortable, like the Navajo people, the Navajo Nation, hey, we're not going forward. We lost a lot of people to this. We're going to take our time cautiously removing it. So, like I said, I think the indicators are all good, and I'm excited about that. And I'm excited that we're getting some, more choice in that, as we come into a better phase of this whole COVID thing. I'm not ready to say that it's over yet.
No. Well, at least one of the things that I have noticed of late is that we still hear people testing positive, but they're testing positive with a lot less of the symptoms.
Right.
And especially hospitalization rates and death are going way down. So that's good news. And what's interesting to me, when I heard the governor make the announcements, and I've known this all along, every time she'd come on Facebook or go on the air to talk about her weekly updates, is that she always brought along with her data gathered by science.
Right.
She had a group working up at Los Alamos National Labs to do modeling as to where things are going. Of course, all the input from Department of Health, Dr. Scars, uh, 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 from the Cabinet Secretary for Health. So all that brings us to the point where we are now. I think we hear a lot of people talking about, well, she did it because it's an election year. Well, anymore, every year is an election year. I mean, we're electing somebody every year, whether
Yeah.
it's municipal races and school board, or county commission, and all the way up to the Congress. Every year we're having elections, so I don't think it's based on that. I think it is based on science and the facts, and we got to get the economy going again, and it seems like it's right to do this now, as far as I'm concerned. I went to a couple stores this weekend without the mask. My son was finally happy to take off his mask, and we're really comfortable.
Yeah.
We've both been vaccinated and boosted, so he was happy to see faces, and we got to smile at some folks. It's funny because for the last 2 years I'd be smiling at everybody under the mask and not knowing whether I'm smiling or not, but it's just my nature to smile at folks. So I was happy to see those faces out there, and hopefully things go well, going forward.
Yeah, well, you got a good smile. And I'll say one thing, we saw it already through COVID. We saw a lot of the nurses and the medical staff. We saw a lot of attrition and workers walking away from those positions under stress, under stress of COVID. And however you judge it, the big concern, the big reason for all the restrictions initially was to, reduce the load on the hospitals, the hospital beds, try to keep the hospital bed count down and manageable for all the patients that were coming in. And, I think that's why it's a good time now. We're seeing that we're not at that threat of using all of our hospital beds, and like you said, the lower mortality rate for this new whatever, virus of COVID. I don't know enough, but I do know, like I says, if the threat of hospitals and severe hospitalizations and death is down, then that the concern of the governor that those resources would be overtaxed and we would have to select who got care and who didn't have care was a good reason to try to rein that in as early as possible. And like I said, I think it's interesting compared to the 1918 Spanish influenza that took place. I mean, this was a very well covered thing. We had a lot of graphs, a lot of documentation, a lot of modeling that was put out there for people to digest and understand what was going on. But that big two-pronged thing, keep people out of the hospitals and keep things out of the cemetery. I think we accomplished that in as best we could.
And I heard some interesting a story. I'm on my way up here today. Is that even before COVID hit, we actually had a shortage statewide in doctors and nurses in particular.
Yeah.
So that was already a crisis, and now it's been, it's even more so now because a lot of those people got burned out during COVID, and we're needing to refurbish our nursing staffs throughout the state. And I think, we kind of get to go back to where we left off and say, okay, what were the issues then? How do we take them up now to continue the efforts? And I think nursing and doctors in particular are a big thing. Again, we were doing the show before the COVID hit, and we talked about healthcare in the rural communities, and I guess we can bring that general fact back on to the front burner that now we need to start addressing those things again. I know that Socorro General Group is looking to hire 2 new doctors, or expecting 2 new doctors to come in. So those things are getting put back on the front burner.
Yeah. And I think hopefully we'll see a lot more of that, because we have to do, we've talked about the fact that, the 4-year college, New Mexico Tech, that we need a 2-year community college in a rural community would be a really good thing, because we need to improve on more nurse training, more technical, more trades. There's a lot of shortages of workers that we need to increase. And part of that is making those schools more accessible to people who live in a rural community that don't necessarily want to travel to Albuquerque or Las Cruces to get that training. And to grow our nursing staff, to grow our technical and our trade staff, in our local rural communities. And like so hopefully the shortage will encourage us with the abundance of funds in the state right now to do something about community college, to do something about technical and trade and nursing programs where we need it the most in our rural community, and doing more to ensure that there's actually jobs, for those people in the rural community to stay where they want to live.
And I think one of the important things that we saw during this COVID pandemic is that we saw a lot of monies come down from Washington to help get communities and states through these issues. But now's an opportunity to use some of that money to refurbish those jobs that were lost in all areas, but especially in that line of work. Uh, we did hear a new term come up. Well, maybe it's not such a new term, but it was used quite a bit more now. Is telemedicine?
Oh yes,
and this is an opportunity to take some of those practices that had to be put into place during COVID and tweak them to make them better, so that those people in rural areas can actually access their doctors without having to the fear of going to the doctor's office.
Well, and it's also like you said with Socorro General bringing 2 new doctors in, and we look at the mental health issue that's in Socorro County alone. It's in the top 10 in the state, the state is in the top 10 as a nation as far as having that as a problem. And telemedicine is good for doctors because we can get access to metropolitan doctors. We can get doctors across the nation through telemedicine that we can't bring into a rural environment. So we can get access to resources that we don't have through telemedicine. And that's especially true when we look at psychology and counseling and psychiatrists, is having that remote telemedicine address. When Cachita Torres was running, she talked about that with her own family and some issues there, and trying to bring that telemedicine in. So our broadband connectivity, telemedicine, we keep bringing this up, and it's, but it's like, that allows us to get more professionals into a remote community, because there is possibility with good video imaging, to have a dialogue remotely in the privacy of your own home with a psychologist, a counselor, bring those resources in from a larger area where we don't have the affordability to bring them into our community physically to live, but we can remotely connect with them and get some much needed services and alleviate some of the suffering that we have, because we might have more access to psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, some of those higher level professions that it really takes a much larger population than Socorro to sustain. And telemedicine can help us bridge that gap and provide more access to people. So it's definitely something that the county, the hospital, everybody should be looking at what we can do. And we saw that again with the funding. There's a lot of federal funding out there for broadband, a lot of initiatives for broadband. We know, like I said last show, that Ethos Broadband is building out fiber. Being an engineer and an architect in that, optical fiber is the best way to go. We had a great conversation with the Land Commissioner Richards last time, talking about how trails and right-of-ways can be used to bury fiber, to put fiber in where it doesn't obscure the skyline. It doesn't affect the sacred places of the Dene and the native communities, which are typically high mountains that you want to put radio towers on, but it becomes invisible. It's under our trail systems. It's under existing transmission line right-of-ways. But that broadband is more than a commercial service. It's access to medicine. It's access to care. It's access to services. It's become much more vital, much like we saw in the 1940s when electric cooperatives came into existence, because it wasn't economically profitable to distribute electricity in rural communities, and the government stepped in and we created those electric cooperatives. We're at the same point right now with broadband, and we really need to take a more holistic view, a more inclusive view of all the players in that, to bridge those gaps of telemedicine as we started this conversation out with.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the technologies that we saw focused during the pandemic have been eye-opening. The way people meet, who Zoom was a product of the pandemic, but I think one of the things that it's done, it's that it's let poorer communities, counties, be heard in a lot of these meetings where otherwise they wouldn't be, because they don't have budget to attend every single meeting in person, especially when they have to travel to Albuquerque or Santa Fe. When you talk about getting folks from Hobbs together with folks from San Juan County, then that's the whole length of the state from corner to corner, and now it's much easier doing it that way. But we still see that it's not perfect, because even when we were zooming with land commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard, we had some issues,
Yeah.
so there's still work needs to be done on that, and I think hopefully it will be done.
Yeah, I think it's important when you talk about that. Like here in Socorro, our median income is about 17,000, and we talked about that in meetings with Sam Crabtree and some of what Scope is doing and looking at the economics of a car that's not very reliable. Maybe you can't keep up on all the maintenance. You certainly can't drive that around. And given the gas prices and the rising inflation, getting to these meetings is more than most other people think about. It takes a lot as far as gas money to get there, the reliability of the car to get there, and so a lot of people are excluded from these public events and meetings just by the nature of their poverty and not having a good horse and cart to get there.
Yep.
And not telemedicine, broadband is one of those things, like you said, with Zoom and with being able to meet online with the Socorro County commissioners and comment. It's one of those things that allows us to break down that and allows more people to participate when their vehicle can't get them to the meeting, when it costs too much to get the meeting, and we're able to hear more voices of those people that otherwise marginalized, through transportation issues. But you're also marginalized, like you said, if you have broadband issues and you can't even connect and you don't have the computer or the resources to do that. And, as we look for a more equitable society and a broader voice, broadband is definitely one of those tools that can, open that platform up, just like what we're doing here with Vocal with Val and our community thing, using the internet to connect to our community, to share ideas, to discuss things. Like Land Commissioner said, we brought up ideas that she'd heard for the first time there, and we're able to extend that. I can't travel to Santa Fe.
Yeah, not all the time to get into a meeting with her
No.
or any of the other elected officials.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of which, I'll announce right now that our guest for Friday is going to be our current state auditor, Brian Colon. He's running for Attorney General, but we're going to talk about what he's done in the last 3.5 years in the auditor's office. So I think that's going to be an interesting conversation there. And I'll just bring up one of the things that I thought was spoke to the integrity of Mr. Colon, is that he started auditing more and more elected officials.
Yeah.
Like the mayor of Las Vegas got in trouble about what she was doing with the budget for the city of Las Vegas, and got in trouble with it. And I think that's refreshing to see a politician doing the job that they were elected to do. Finally, I was at the county convention for the Democrats this last Saturday, and there was a couple of new members wanting to run for office. And it's funny because they came up and they said, well, I'm not a politician. And it happened 2 or 3 times. Well, I'm not a politician, but I want to run. But, politician shouldn't be a dirty word. It shouldn't be a bad thing. Politicians are supposed to execute politics, which is the art of government. And I reminded them like that. As soon as you decided to step up and say, hey, I'm running for office, you became a politician. And let's make it to where that means that we're seeking men of integrity, women of integrity,
Principles.
and principles and virtues to run for those offices, so that politician doesn't seem like a bad term anymore.
Yeah, well, you have to get, the idea of citizen and serving in your politics is part of your civic duty, part of your being a citizen, and being concerned about the welfare of the group that you're a part of, the community that you're a part of. And yeah, it shouldn't be a bad thing. But again, this is why the murder of John Tunstall is so important in investigating and looking at our history with the Santa Fe Ring, which had a lot to do with beef contracts, it had to do with land grants, it had to do with water. Many of the issues that we're facing today in politics aren't new issues. If there aren't things in place to control how some of those things happen, and there isn't people like Brian Colon to hold people accountable, those situations, that public trust gets corrupted because there's no one to check on it. That's why it's important to keep politics out of our, politics we should say is partisanship, out of our organizations. I thought it was really good that Brian Colon was investigating Catron County and Ian Fletcher and some of the people that I was with when my business was destroyed, with no recourse as a small business. So I was really happy to see him diving into things. But if you look at the history of the Lincoln County War, you look at the history of Thomas Catron, you look at some of that history that's actually recorded. It's not now, it's happened, and it's a part of record. We can see where New Mexico has a lot of things that are still in play from that old Wild West days. And we have a lot to overcome to where people do feel proud to say, hey, I'm getting involved in politics as a concerned citizen because I can believe that I can make a difference. And it isn't all just about money outfunding me. It's about I have good ideas and I have an actionable plan that I'm going to bring to the legislator, that I'm going to bring to an executive office, or I'm going to bring neutrality to the judiciary. That's really important.
Yep, and we do know that primary elections are on June. So 1 month before that election day, June 6th, when the polls open, around May 9th. So that's really right around the corner. So hopefully we can invite more and more of those political figures that are seeking office to come and talk to us on both sides. Republicans, Democrats, declined states, independents, the Green Party's still out there, Libertarians are still a part here. So anybody that's running for office, if you wanna come on and speak to us about why you're running and what change you wanna affect, absolutely get a hold of us and we'll schedule you some time to come and chat with us. So looking forward to seeing Brian.
That's Friday at 10 o'clock on Vocal with Val.
We saw that I don't know how it was Saturday in Texas for you, but it was like 70 degrees at the plaza. Beautiful day, really nice. Got to see a little bit of spring. I think winter's gonna step in again this week and show her face and say we're not done with winter yet. According to the Puxatawny Phil, we still have a few more weeks to bear through, and it sure looks like that with the clouds out there today.
Yeah, they don't have any high precipitation. They do have some red flag warnings in effect in Truth or Consequences and mountain air for the high winds because they're going to see gusts of upwards of 50. But yeah, we're supposed to drop down into the 50s again and stay that way through the weekend. So I think you're right, Val. We're going to get a little chill.
And hopefully we'll see some snow in the mountains so that we could have some runoff this spring and summer for our farmers and ranchers. They're always in need of water. That's always been a hot topic in New Mexico, both for recreation, for farming and raising our animals, but also an interesting point that Stephanie Garcia Richards brought up is that now more and more these fracking companies are being forced to use recycled water instead of fresh water to do their kind of mining.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's important because that domestic beneficial use is one of the primary things of the state engineer for water, and but we've got to do a better job of managing it. Hopefully, like I said, there was a big rollout. There was some funds released to put remote monitoring on all the wells in New Mexico. I'm not sure how that project is going, but there was a considerable amount of money. I think it was something like $20,000 or $30,000 per site to equip them with remote telemetry. But as we like COVID, as we get the better data about our water tables and their flow and things of that nature, we'll have better insight how to manage it. I mean, I've worked with Missoula Water Company in my career, and having that data is really important to being able to manage your resources and decide whether a fracking company can take X amount of gallons per hour, to do their fracking, or if we need to save it back for agriculture and beneficial domestic uses, it's called.
And something interesting that I saw in the news is that, when I was young in high school and started driving, we all wanted that hot rod car that'll, drag race down California Street. And we never thought of electric vehicles. I mean, even 10 years ago, when Tesla started putting out their vehicle, it was like, maybe it'll work, maybe it'll never work. But now we see every car maker coming up with their version of the electric vehicle. Ford just surpassed Tesla's the number one producer of electric vehicles the last year or so. So it seems like it's going to be the future, and I think that promises to be a good thing for our Mother Earth first and foremost, but it also gives us the opportunity because we have the best sun in the country. We have great winds. We have infrastructure starting to go in place to help navigate those changes.
Yeah, well, I think like it says, if you're one of those homeowners that's ahead of the curve on things, and you're putting solar panels on your house directly, and you can charge your car directly, I mean that's gonna make a huge impact not only for the environment but for your bottom line. The issues that we have here in Socorro, we've had for some time. Magdalena School District had two 16 kilowatt uninterruptible power supply systems because the power was so unreliable. The city of Socorro has one major transmission line at 115 kV, if I'm remembering correctly, serving our entire city in Socorro Electric Cooperative, which goes all the way out to Catron County. And that's going to need to change when we start putting those charging stations. I was up in Wagon Wheel Mound in northern New Mexico, surprised to see, I think it was a 4 or 6 stall, fast charging station for electric cars. Socorro, sitting in the center of New Mexico in between Albuquerque and Las Cruces, is an ideal location to stop in, grab a meal at one of our restaurants, and charge up your electric cars. But we have to have the transmission and the local distribution utility up to par to handle the additional load of those charging stations. But there's some big money coming out from the federal government, some big incentives to build more charging stations and distribute charging stations throughout the state, out through rural regions, New Mexico being one of them. And if we can capitalize on that with solar, if we can capitalize on that with new transmission lines, and we can bring broadband into those transmission lines, we could get a real win situation. Because again, when you go out to Daddle and you see the old sign of Daddle that talked about all the scenic places, the Painted Desert, Grand Canyon, everything that's west of Daddle and what's west here in the Gila National Forest, to have a charging station in Socorro for these vehicles would be a really great thing to have. But we need better infrastructure in our distribution and our transmission lines. And for those savvy homeowners, putting solar. I had a 3 kilowatt solar system in my home in reserve, and it was amazing. And my brother-in-law has a solar on his house, an electric charging car, and it really reduces his bottom line because he can go to work and it doesn't cost him anything but the sunlight.
And just the advantages of solar now compared to even 10, 15 years ago is such a difference. Back 20 years ago, you'd almost have to convert your whole house to DC, where you'd have the DC lamps and everything, and AC wasn't much of an option. But that has all changed now.
Oh, it's amazing, some of the inverters and the technology that's out there that's basically almost like plug and play. Not exactly, but pretty close. Mm-hmm. Even the fact that the old days you had to cut and do your own connections between panels. Nowadays, it's an all standardized snap and play connectorized system. You can't get the polarity wrong because the connectors are all polarized. Nope. So the ease of it is really amazing. You're right, where it's come to, how it's matured. There's huge market for it, and it is a good thing. There's some changes that could be made, within the electrical trades and some of the licensing in New Mexico. I'm very much a proponent of pass a skill exam, show that you have the knowledge, do a handful of projects, 5 to 10, to have those inspected, and then get your license. That you don't necessarily need to be someone else's apprentice for a period of time if you can demonstrate you've got the ability. And if we change some of that, we definitely probably have a boom. It's amazing how few people have taken advantage of federal and state tax refunds in Socorro and Catron County, for solar incentives here. And I don't know if that's entirely due to the work shortage and the labor shortage, but it is amazing how little people have taken advantage of that.
And it's amazing how much we get to talk about stuff here on our broadcast.
Yeah.
When we bring in our elected officials, we might want to start with one subject concerning and why they were elected. We talked to Stephanie Garcia Richards about the lands, and it turns out we're having a discussion about technologies and everything else, and more. If you want to be an elected official, you got to be up to date on all these different things because they're going to come up in votes you have to do, whether it's city council, county commission, even the school board. So absolutely, you have to be on your toes and up to date on what's happening out there, and listen to your community, so you'll know what they're asking for. So
Exactly. And one of the community members and listeners of our show, talked about to me, with the upcoming mayor election, and we understand Ravi's going to be running for representative. What they've never seen is an actual plan. What am I going to do day one when I get in the office? What is an actual plan that I'm putting before the people of what things I want to accomplish, how I'm going to accomplish those, and what can we expect if you elect me? What is your plan if you elect me as mayor for the city of Socorro, right? And so the people that we interview, would be good to have a plan of being, like you said, being on top of the different challenges that we have, but how in the complexity of today's society, they're all interrelated. I mean, if we put a solar panel on our house, hey, that's interrelated to having an electric car at some point, or maybe having one now.
Sure.
If we upgrade the transmission lines, if we're running SunZia through Socorro, why aren't we upgrading our local transmission lines to where we can provide more power to support fast charging stations in Magdalena, fast charging stations in Socorro, fast charging stations in Daddle? We'll need that kind of big infrastructure, and we need people to not think we're just a place to pass through, but we require these resources, and we require the same level of quality and reliability that a big metropolitan area has, to have reliable broadband, to have reliable services, and to be more green locally, right here where we are, locally produced, locally consumed.
And I think one of the biggest challenges here is when you run for county commission.
Yeah.
You might live in downtown Socorro, but you better be up to date about what's going on at the Alamo Reservation or up north at La Jolla, Magdalena, San Antonio, because you got to vote on all those issues brought forth to you concerning the entire county, not just what's happening in your neighborhood.
Oh, look at Vegeta and the poverty issues in Vegeta.
Absolutely, absolutely. Water, power, everything, education. Just getting some kind of economy there. I went to a funeral last week for an old advocate of La Jolla. He was advocating now to help finish some repairs on the old gymnasium out there, and we've had some issues with that. But he was on the housing board with us. He was part of the Acequia Association out there. So we lost a good man in Mr. Marcelo Beta. But what I think is a tribute to him is that his children still live there and kind of are taking up the torch that he carried to help their community out there in La Jolla. So I think La Jolla is going to be fine. They got some good young people coming up there. So
fantastic.
Those are the things. And since we're talking about folks, I was looking at Facebook this morning and I saw some birthday wishes I'd like to pass on. An old friend of mine lived down on Bagley Street. We grew up on across Highway 60 here on Granada Street. Eddie Chavez is having a birthday today. Our old principal at the middle school, David Marcus, is celebrating a birthday today. Mark House, one of the musicians from Socorro, he played bass with Southern Rail and Anthony Rosas.
Cool.
Still plays bass. I think he played here locally at, I don't know if he was at Macy Center with one of the groups here lately, but I see him all the time on Facebook. Old friend of mine. His birthday's tomorrow, and I got an auntie that lives in California, but we're Facebook friends, so I get to wish her a happy birthday. Auntie Tommy Matoyo Baca. I haven't seen her maybe once or twice in the last 30 or 40 years, but I see that she's doing fine, so I'll wish her a happy birthday. And then my brother Seppi retired.
What?
So I think his official last day, he drove up his state vehicle to turn it in Albuquerque on Friday, and Saturday and Sunday, I think he spent both days on the golf course. So he's already in retirement mode, but no telling with my brother there. He might be back in some capacity working again in New Mexico. So I want to wish my brother a happy and good retirement. I don't know what else. I don't have any other notes here. Reese, that I've written down. Is there anything you want to talk about?
Well, just say happy birthday to everyone that's got a birthday today and all the names that you just announced there, and happy retirement to Sephi. But yeah, no, we've got the big thing I want to let you guys know about again. There is an Irish lady, and I don't have her name in front of me, and I should have got it, but there's a New Mexico Tech Performing Arts Center event on Friday night at 7:30, and I think it's Kathleen Ivers is going to be playing there.
Eileen Ivers.
Eileen, thank you. Eileen Ivers is going to be playing there, so don't forget there's the Performing Arts Series Friday night concert with Eileen Ivers playing fiddle. And, of course, we've got our own event happening March 5th. Award-winning singer-songwriter and local champion farrier Doug Figgs is going to be performing in a dinner concert with a visiting guest from Montana, Almeda Bradshaw. She was down at the Lone Star Poetry Gathering. And we're going to have a dinner and concert March 5th. And that's going to be 5 to 7 p.m. And it should be 2 hours of great music. A nice intimate setting, a lot of Western music. The key is the lyrics and the music and being able to listen to the artist. It's definitely something you want to listen to. Not so much for bouncing around, but a really great show. Looking forward to that. That's going to be Saturday, March 5th, 5 to 7 p.m. Make plans. You can find tickets on riograndevalleyradio.com/live events. And take a look at that. Take a look at Jackson Ranch Steakhouse. This is going to be the first Stagecoach sessions. We're going to be doing more of that. I'm really got a lot of things planned to bring more Western country and live music here to Socorro. So hopefully you can join us for our first event, March 5th, 5 to 7 p.m. with Doug Figgs and Almeda Bradshaw.
And I know that spring means that the spring sports at the high school are starting up, such as baseball, track and field, golf. So all those sports are coming up. Support your local athletes. They're currently doing fundraisers, so help them out. I know that the rugby team at New Mexico Tech had a game on Saturday. I was trying to find out the score. I didn't get to go see it, but our rugby team got to participate in the national championship game last year for small schools, and they were a minute out of going into overtime with
I think the 6 points that was a very close game.
It was a very close game. So they're looking forward to their season again. There's they're building stuff out there so you can go and have refreshments. I know they're inviting food vendors. We'll get the schedule for
definitely
for the minors so that we can share that with you all out there and the listeners. And but I think that's it for today. We're looking forward to our guest, Brian Colon, on Friday. And if anything else comes out, we'll jump on Wednesday or something and bring another show if we need to.
Let me know. And yeah, if you're one of those folks that says we've got James Chavez and Paul Ulibarri Jr. helped us with our Next Gen Sports with Kenny G. If you're interested in helping cover sports, please let me know. Get a hold of me. Message me on Facebook. Definitely, we're going to be working on bringing that back in 2022 and 2023, bringing back our sports team, and we'd really like to have you help us with that. And like as Val said, the field over there at New Mexico Tech now has a scoreboard and a beer garden.
Yeah. You don't need much more than that.
No, you don't need much more than that. Well, thank you so much for coming in today, Val. Really appreciate it.
Alrighty.
All right, folks. Well, hey, have a good afternoon. We're going to get back to traditional country music here on Rio Grande Valley Radio. Going to start off with Keith